Um, I don't know if you've heard, but there's a young man that was assassinated today. 31 years old, leaves behind a wife and two little ones, simply for trying to hold some sort of public, rally or debate or conversation on a campus. And he was murdered today. Then recently, you can't help now but see and be affected by. We are a see and believe generation of people, so we see stuff all the time. It's hard to guard your eyes, because I think just because it's shown doesn't mean you should see it. But John warns about the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, and some of the problems that go with that. But I just happened to see a video of this, just a picture, the still of a young woman, evidently a Ukrainian refugee who was murdered on a train in Charlotte, I think they said. And just the horror and the realization on her face of what had happened to her, and she died just a few moments after that. And I know those are just two of hundreds of people, some who are the subject of political campaigns and rallies, and some whose death has been reported and maybe video shown. Hundreds of some in our country who died. We don't know their names, and they didn't get any press, but just as important. White, black, Asian, Hispanic, rich, poor, whatever political affiliation. 27 years ago, when 11 and a 13-year-old boy shot 20 people at West Side School and killed a teacher and 4 little girls, the press swarmed. And I happened to be one of those pastors at the time that was interviewed. Early on, as I'm just trying to make sense of the senseless tragedy. And the thing that bothered me then, and still bothers me to this day, is in the aftermath of these high-profile tragedies, how many people rush to blame? I don't know what it is about us, but we want to blame. We want to blame this person or that person, this group, that group. Blame. What is it? Do we feel better about ourselves because we can blame? And I was really taken by surprise when the media, and I've said this before, I've even written about it, they come into our little town and they're asking for directions to the school or to the hospital or to downtown, asking for directions, and within 24 hours, they know us so well they can diagnose us and tell us why we did this to ourselves. That rush to judgment, the blame that is easily thrown on others, is really, really disheartening and discouraging. I'm not claiming that the violent death of these 2 people over the last couple of weeks is more important than the others. I'm not. But I can tell you this, 2 things. One, I'm tired of the expression senseless violence, as if there were an alternative, as if there were such a thing as sensible violence. It's redundant. Senseless violence. It's redundant. And I'm tired of hearing about it. And not only do people rush to blame, but they rush to answers they claim that really support their, political cause or whatever, their social cause, their particular agendas. On one of those early interviews, actually what happened was the CNN reporter, I'd gone to West Side School and went there and tried to minister immediately on the aftermath of this, finding out even some of the members of our church were in the line of fire, and a couple of the girls who were members of our church were shot. And I returned to and Bruce Tippett, by the way, Bruce basically called me. We said, okay. He said, you go to the school, I'll go to the hospital. So we kind of, we did that, and he went to the hospital. And then I said to him, I called him and I said, I'm finished at school, I'm going to come to the hospital. He goes, well, I'm done here, I'm going to go to, so we were kind of trying to scramble around, just trying to help in an impossible situation. And I come back to the office and my secretary says, who do you want to talk to, CNN, whoever it was at that time, CBS or ABC? And I kind of laughed and I went on into my office and she came in and said, I'm serious, these three are on the line wanting to talk with you. I said, what do I have to say? So she said, do you want to talk to any of them? And I said, well, I don't know. She said, well, she told me what line, so I picked up line 1 and I start talking. They identify myself and the person on the end of the line says, well, thank you for calling. We have a few questions. And I thought they would just ask me questions. I didn't know at that moment I was on the air. They didn't tell me. And he starts asking questions like, what do I know and why did this happen? And before this is one of those moments when I look back and now I think, the Spirit maybe helped me. I said to him, how could something like this happen in a little town like Jonesboro? Why did this happen? How could you have prevented? And I said something to the effect like, well, I'm not sure, what we could have done to prevent something from this, but I know this. Because of who we are as a people and because of the strong presence of the church in Jonesboro, it will help us get through it. It's after tragedies like this over and over again, and we're getting them now daily, tragedies like this. I believe even more in the gospel, where some people want to blame and then jump into the political fray and then grab their megaphones on their social medium and just start lobbing all kinds of ideas. Again, they work with the assumption they have opinion, therefore it's valuable. That's happening a lot. I just remember this. We wrestle not with flesh and blood, but against principalities and darkness and wickedness in high places. We have an unseen enemy who Jesus said is a thief, and he's out to steal, kill, and destroy. And I'm telling you, he doesn't care the color of your skin. He doesn't care what political party you belong to. He doesn't care because you're made in the image of God. He's out to destroy every single one of us. As Jesus talks about him as a wicked thief, he at that same chapter 9, chapter 10 of John's Gospel, we'll read this text. Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. And the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And he's the only one that has been able to defeat the arch enemy of all humans through his life, death, and resurrection. And to me, the only change that can happen, the only solution to the problem is if the human heart can change. And the only one who can change the human heart is God himself. And yet we have a role to play because we belong to him. And we follow the one who said, love your enemies. Pray for those who hate you. He said that. And he said, I'm not asking anything of you that anything going to happen to me. He even said, told them in advance, this is what's going to happen. He says this in John's gospel. But I'm telling you this to give you joy, because it'll seem like for a while there is no joy. But because of Christ's victory over the enemy, we have joy. And the hope that the enemy has lost, Christ wins, and we are therefore walking in the confidence that God loves every single one of us. You know, it's the first song I learned to sing, I think I remember in church, with, you know, Deep and Wide. I remember that one. But the other one was red and yellow, black and white. He's precious in their sight. Whether you talk about a child in Gaza, you know, or a child in inner city of Chicago. And I believe, I passionately believe the only hope that we have, and it's a strong hope, it's a strong medicine, the resurrection, is in Jesus Christ. So we won't blame. We will pray. We will give. We'll love. We'll share our faith. Felt like I needed to say something because my heart's so heavy tonight. So let's pray. You want to pray with me? Father, we come to you because you're the only one we can truly count on. Human leaders let us down. There's an evil that is stronger than what we can fight. And the last thing we want to do is contribute to the evil, to give him strength, give him ground in our life. You've called each one of us your children. We're going to read about that tonight. John tells us we are your children and the privilege that comes with being children of God. So I pray for the church. I pray for the church in Utah. I pray for the church surrounding the Kirk family, surrounding this family from Ukraine who lost their daughter a few weeks ago in such a horrible tragedy. For all the families who are grieving tonight because their loved ones were killed and no one's talking about it. Not only in our country, but around the world. It seems like, in certain respects, we can be so demoralized and discouraged that the enemy's winning, where evil is running amok, and all this looks like it's unchecked. But Father, help us to be passionate and therefore equally committed to your kingdom and your righteousness first. And help those who are grieving, the nameless ones and those that are well known now. Please draw near to them and comfort them. And Jesus Christ, would you please come soon? Maranatha, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. I've handed out the outline, and this just goes to show you, try to shift gears here, how you can change your mind about things. I think I produced this outline of goodness 35, 40 years ago. And I pretty much stuck with it. There's only one small change I would make, and I didn't see it before I asked Charla to make a copy of this. And that is on the last page under the epilogue, as we're talking about the last chapter, the Galilean parents is the first 14 verse, and then the second story is about the legend of, and I have John there. Well, I've changed my mind. because we don't know who the beloved one is. So if I were to, would you do me a favor, take a pen, scratch the name John out, and put in the legend of the beloved one, because literally that's what it says. To say it's John is claiming more than a text. Now, there's a good reason maybe to believe it is John, but I've changed my mind on that. But the reason I didn't change my mind on the rest of it is that this is the very outline John used when he composed his gospel. Thank you. My wife got that joke. And she never laughs at my jokes, so that's really a good thing.
I hadn't heard that one.
I was wondering if they rewrote it since you originally did this.
If the gospel
of John has been rewritten since you originally.
No, I'm still working with the same gospel. But yeah, so there it is. But just to kind of give a brief overview, you've got the outline, and this is the one I'll be following. It's the way I try to make sense. And by the way, this is not original to me. I learned a lot from a number of New Testament scholars. So most of this, I'd probably say 90% of it is just a compilation of what scholars have said and the ones who have taught me either in person or who I've read. So this is certainly not original. But you see, what I love about John and his gospel, I mentioned this last time, is you've got this equally ordered and structured gospel where you have a prologue, a word before he begins, and the actual gospel begins, you might say. That's what prologue is a pre-word. And the gospel begins in chapter 1, verse 19. And it ends with an epilogue, meaning the gospel seems to have come to an end in the conclusion, which is chapter 20, verses 30-31. John even says, this is why the gospel was written. This is why I wrote it. And it's almost like a really fitting end of the gospel, and you really expect it to be done with. I mean, when you're done with, and Jesus did, these signs, he did many things, but I've told you these things that you'll believe that he's the Christ, Son of God. And by believing you have eternal life, boom, end of story. I mean, that's a great, if I would have been John's editor, I would have said, great ending, stop right there. No, he decides he wants one more story, the epilogue, which almost seems like a tag-on, and scholars talk about that. And yet, there is literary symmetry here. The epilogue is doing something that the prologue does as well. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But you've got like the bookends of this great gospel, a prologue and an epilogue that really are framing the whole thing he's doing. And they really it's an inclusio. It's almost like these pro and epilogues are talking to one another, pointing forward and pointing back about what has happened to the reader, especially as you work through his gospel, as you've heard it. Because most people in John's day were illiterate. They would have heard it, they wouldn't have read it. And then between these two kind of bookends are the two equal parts, like the two tablets of the laws of the Ten Commandments. You've got the first part, which is chapter 1, 19 through 12, the last verse, is a book of signs. And there's 7 signs that Jesus performs. And there is a culminative effect, as we mentioned last time, to the signs he performs. He's building a case for something. And the material that comes between the signs is what Jesus says is just as important as what he does. As a matter of fact, John correlates the two. Sometimes you'll hear what he says and then see it, or you'll see what he is doing, what he meant, and then he says it. So it kind of there's this, you might say, this dialogue that starts happening between the signs Jesus performs and his teaching. They're working together so that the climax, which like any chiasmus, like an X, the climax is in the middle. That's the way Easterners believed. You make your major point in the middle. You work towards it, and then you work away from it. And the major point that is made is at the end of chapter 12, which the light has come into the world. And he shines, this is what he says in the prologue, and the witness now is evident. The 7th sign, the last sign, the perfect sign, the sign to end all signs, revealing who Jesus is. If you can't see it after the raising of Lazarus, you'll never see it. And so the 12th chapter kind of ties it up and says, okay, now that we know who he is, so what? So what? That's the second part. And the book of signs then moves into a book of glory, where in the first 12 chapters of John's gospel, Jesus is speaking to anyone who has ears to hear, anyone who has eyes to see the sign. It's for everybody. The signs are for everyone. And he's, you might say, winnowing out or filtering or revealing who is children of light and who is children of darkness, who gets it and who doesn't. So that when he's done in chapter 12, he's done. Now that you might say, now that we know who are the children of light, they believe in him. Now in chapters 13 through 20, he turns to them and starts only speaking to them. And what he talks about is glory. Glory, which is an incredibly loaded word that we'll talk about. The book of glory, and again, C.H. Dodd is the one who wrote the fourth gospel, and his book has had a huge influence on scholarship, but I've really agreed with him that the book of signs and the book of glory are the twin themes of this gospel. So when we get to the book of glory, we'll talk about how it's functioning and the significance of why it was important for Jesus to quit a public ministry, no longer a public revelation. Now he reveals himself personally and only to those who have eyes to see the signs. And why is it that they need to see the glory? Why? And then we come to the end. So that's an explanation of the outline and overall a bird's eye view, you might say. And so do you have any questions about the outline, about anything I said tonight before we jump back in and kind of finish the prologue? And I promise you we'll go faster after tonight, but I really wanted to slow down because the prologue is so impactful for the reader. It orients the reader. It gives you a heads up. It's like a sneak preview of what's to come so you can be prepared for it when it happens. It has great significance not only in the literary terms but also theological terms of what John is claiming. And then after that, I want to take John's gospel a chapter at a time, maybe even more than a chapter. So we won't be looking at every verse like we're doing in the first 18 verses. So with that said, do you have any questions before I jump in and finish the prologue? Okay. So the 4 points, and as you can see it in the outline of the prologue, he makes the first claim that the Word is God, verses 1 through 5. We talked about that. Then what's fascinating to me, as he says in verse 5, he speaks of this word that is light. So he shifts the metaphor from word to light. And that light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can't compete with it. It can't comprehend it. It can't coexist with it. In other words, light always defeats darkness, always. Darkness can't ever defeat light. They are mutually exclusive. That dualism is dominant theme for John in his gospel. You expect the very next verse to say this, all right? Verse 6. There came a man sent from God whose name was, you expect him to say Jesus, right? Because he said the Word is God, and he was with God, created, and then the Word is light, and the light is the life of men, and right? And so there came a man, and we go as Christians, oh, we know this. Sent from God. His name was John? Well, wait, what? You've just told us about the Word and the light. What's going on here? I'll come back to that in a minute. I just want to point that out. You know, we're so used to it, we can't kind of hear the shock of it. But what does he say about John? Well, he is the witness to the light. You would think light wouldn't need a witness. You would think light would be self-evident, yes? But it's interesting. Although light is the life of men, God sent a witness to the light, to point to the light. And so I want to borrow I want to claim presumptuously here that the context then is the light comes into the darkness. The context is darkness. And if you're in the dark, the one thing you want, if it's complete darkness, is someone to show you where the light is. Have you ever been like at the cave at Mountain View? What's that cave called? Blanchard Cave, Blanchard Springs. And if you've been there, you know they take you in there and they take you deep into the bowels of it for a little, and then they shut the lights off completely. And it is so dark, you can't see, boy. And there's a moment for me that I was like, okay, you made your point, turn the light back on. It is the light that comes into the darkness. So the context is darkness. Matthew does this at the end of chapter 4. The people who sat in darkness saw a great light. But if you're in darkness, you need someone to testify, light is that way. It's that way. And John is the one who was sent to be a witness to the light, to bear witness, so that all could believe, everyone. And again, the gospel that John has, that he puts forward, is he believes in the universal appeal of the gospel. He certainly recognizes not everyone will believe the gospel. He's not a universalist, but he has a whosoever will may come, like Paul. Anyone can believe, as long as you have eyes to see the light. But the good news is, as the story begins, there was a man who knew the light was coming, said he saw the light when it happened, and he started pointing people to that light. Bear witness. And verse 8, he wasn't the light, although we expect it to be him, but came that it might bear witness of the light. Now, just briefly, scholars go, why in this prologue that's emphasizing the importance of Jesus as the Word, why so early does he want to tell the story of John? Or, introduce John theologically as an important role, as his role as a witness. And I keep thinking of the Greek word for witness is martyros, or martyr. We get the word martyr from it. Now, in those days, if you're a witness, doesn't mean you're automatically going to die, but isn't it fascinating? Our word martyr comes from this Greek word martyros, which means witness, testifier. So why would John want to tell so quickly he's not the light? Well, in John's gospel, unlike the synoptics, John the Baptizer lasts for a while, you might say, in the narrative. He shows up even as late as chapter 3. I mean, the gospel starts with him. John the Baptizer coming, and they're baptizing a bunch of people. The way Mark begins his gospel. And the religious leaders, the Pharisees, Sadducees, are curious about him. Who do you think you are? And who do you say you are? And all that kind of stuff. According to Mark, as well as Matthew and Luke, John makes his appearance, prepares for the light, and then Jesus comes and is baptized, and John gets out of the way. If it were a play, you would have scene 1, John, the baptizer. And then he's baptizing. What are you doing here? Who do you think you are? Well, someone's coming and you need to be ready. And then Jesus comes, he's baptized. And as a audience watching the play unfold, you get to see what Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell us. In other words, Matthew, Mark, and Luke serve as witnesses. They tell what happened. They give a narration. And he goes in the water, and he's placed in, and the heavens split open, and the voice says, "This is my beloved Son." The Spirit falls like a dove. All that. You get to witness it as an audience member. And then John's done. Get him out of the way. And Jesus immediately takes over the subject of the narrative, and all 3 gospel writers, the synoptics, start talking about Jesus. And John only makes a brief appearance later in Mark and Matthew, not in Luke, of his death, his martyrdom. It's fascinating that in John, and we'll see this, so I'm stealing his thunder, you don't get to witness the baptism of Jesus. It's not narrated to you as an event. You don't get to see Jesus go in the water. You don't get to hear the voice. You don't get to see the Spirit fall on Jesus like a dove. But yet it's there. How is it there? Are you familiar with it? John tells those who are following him what he saw. In other words, you're getting it secondhand from John. Why? He's the witness. There it is. So John's gospel is very consistent. He points to the importance of the baptizer. And what's interesting is that John continues to show up in the narrative, even to the point that, like it's in chapter 3, there's arguments over water rights, who gets to baptize where. And John's disciples come to him and say, you know that guy you baptized? Well, he's baptizing upriver a little way, and he's stealing all our converts. And John has to, the baptizer has to go, no, he must increase, I must decrease. And this is the one way it shows up in John's gospel, unlike Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I'm the bridegroom. I'm the friend of the bridegroom. He's the bridegroom. I prepare for his wedding, but I get out of the way. He must increase, I must decrease. All this kind of language where in John makes his appearance, gets off the stage in a play of John's gospel. The baptizer shows up and then shows up again, shows up. He just keeps, their ministries overlap. And this emphasis, the baptizer is not the light. He's not. But he had an important function to perform. It's because, you may be aware of this, Acts talks about this, and we even know in church history what happened. There were some of John's disciples, even though the baptizer kept pointing at Jesus saying, follow him, they continued to follow him. They were dedicated to the baptizer. They continued to promote his messiahship. As a matter of fact, Paul encounters some of them in Ephesus. There's a sect of people to this day who argue John the Baptizer is the Messiah. They exist to this day. They live in northern Iraq among the Kurds, the Mandeans. They live other places too. That's fascinating, isn't it? And some scholars argue that John writing a gospel to Christians in Ephesus who are encountering these members of the group that maintain that John is the true Messiah. And John writes the gospel to set the record straight. He's important, yes, but he's not the light. And so scholars say this. It's fascinating how in Matthew, Mark, and Luke this happens, and in John as well. John points to Jesus. He's coming. That gives him credibility that he's a true prophet. He predicted it. It comes true. Jesus points to John to reveal his credibility as the one who comes after and lauds John. In other words, these two men point to each other to prove that they're credible. And the role that John the Baptizer plays in the Gospels is important, and yet all four Gospels say, yes, that's important, but John, he was not the one. He had a role to play. He did. He did his job. Indeed, he was a martyr for the messiahship of Jesus. Any questions about that? Did I get a little too technical there, or a little too... Okay. Is it Acts 19, I think? You can read more about it. I think it's Acts 18 or 19, right on there. When Paul goes and he finds people who only know John's baptism. Okay. In verses 9 through 13, John, in his prologue, returns to Jesus as the subject, picks up the idea of the light. And again, the fact that he comes into a dark world, established from verse 5, is that when this true light comes into the world, he enlightens everybody in the world. And that's fascinating to me. In other words, it's like the light comes into the cave, you might say, to use my previous and so it lights up the whole, everyone. Because, verse 10, he's in the world. He's not only in the world to reveal the light of God, he is the light of God. And he made the world. And yet the surprising twist in the story is told in two ways. First, in verse 10, even though he made the world acts like it doesn't know him. It's like creatures who don't recognize their creator. It's like a son or a daughter that will not recognize a father or mother. So even though he made the world, and remember we talked about that last time, how is it that Jesus made? Well, he's the Word, and God used words to create all things and sustain all things. Genesis 1, let there be light. So when God speaks, it is creative, it is powerful, it does not return void, it is wisdom. We talked about that compared like with Proverbs 8. He comes as a light into the whole world, he lights up the whole world, and yet the world does not know him. And then more specifically, talking about the whole world, in verse 11, John speaks specifically, he comes not only to the whole world, but he comes to his own people, his kinsmen. And those who were his own people did not receive him, which is another surprising twist. Not only does the world not recognize the creature doesn't recognize the creator, the world doesn't recognize the one that made it, his own people don't recognize the one for whom they've been waiting. Which is kind of surprising because, and that is a major sticking point in Jesus' scholarship, trying to make sense of why it is that Jesus was not more successful among his own people, but was incredibly successful, the gospel, with ignorant pagan Gentiles who have no clue what's right and wrong. But these ignorant Gentiles believed it, but most of his people did not receive him. So what does that mean? Is it failure? No, because John has this dualism again. And the way he explains it is this, verse 12, as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God. So that's adoption language, by the way. So you become a child of God, according to John's gospel, because you receive the one whom God sent. Those who believe in his name, and that's key for John, as it is for all the gospel writers and for Paul. The Hebrew name for Jesus is has the same consonants, because Hebrew is a language with only consonants, no vowels. Vowels were part of the vocalization that was memorized but not written down, right? So all you get are consonants, and the same consonants of Jesus' name is the same as Joshua, it's the same as Isaiah. Just the vocalization changes, the vowels, you might say, change, how they pronounce it. But both Joshua, Isaiah, and Jesus, that's name means the same thing, and it's Yahweh saves. Yeshua, Yahweh saves. Yahweh, God, the God of Israel, the covenant God of Moses, saves. So he comes to his own, they don't receive him, but those who receive, he gives them the right to be children of God because they've received him. Those who believe that he embodies his name. He saves. And of course, if saved, what does it imply about you before you were saved? That you need a Savior. And we'll find out as the story unfolds that those who did not receive him did not believe they needed his salvation, or they didn't want it, or whatever. We'll talk about that later. And this is common in Eastern cultures even this day, but especially, read the Hebrew Scriptures, the name of a person reveals their destiny. In a couple of weeks, I'll preach on Jacob, and his name, Yaakov, means one who grabs the heel, and it came to be a euphemism for a deceiver. So the one who grabs the heel deceives, and of course, Jacob lives up to his name. We'll talk this Sunday about Isaac, whose name means, do y'all know that? Laughter. And of course, he brought laughter to an old couple. So these names matter. So Jesus is indeed the embodiment of his name. His name is his destiny. Yeah, God saves. And those who receive it become children of God. They're adopted. It's something he does. But what about those who don't believe? Verse 13. Oh, sorry. They believe. And how is it they believe? Verse 13, I should say. They're born not of blood. So ethnicity or bloodline doesn't matter with regards to their status as children of God. They are not made children of God by the will of flesh, of human effort, and they're not made of human desire, the will. The only way you become a child of God is by God, and that has been determined because those who are children of light see the light, they walk in the light. Those who are children of darkness are repelled by it. So when John talks about that, in verses 14 through 18, that the Word becomes a man, he shifts the language. He speaks of flesh, but in this case, the flesh is not evil to John. It's just not sufficient, you might say. It's not enough for salvation. In verses 14 through 18, the Word becomes a man. And what's interesting about this is that you've got a mixed metaphor. In verse 14, the word that's been used all along here, forward, logos, means, and this word logos is a broad word that can mean a thing or stuff or an idea or a concept. Okay? So I'll put it like this. The word is something that is conceptual. Now the Hebrew people had another word for what I'm doing now, speaking a word. For example, I can say the word cat, and in your mind, an image comes in your head, and that image is the logos. But when I say cat, now what I've done is taken whatever you have in your head, and I've given it a name, or the word we're given, and that is the rhema. It is the spoken. So what John should have written was the logos became rhema, and we heard him. But what's really interesting is he mixes the metaphor. He says the logos became a thing, flesh, and dwelt among us. And the word he uses here is skenao, and that means skue is the noun form, and it's basically referring to a tent or a tabernacle. This is temple language. So when Jesus comes as a man, he is in the flesh, a human being, in every sense of the word. He is the presence of God. He is the tabernacle of God. And the one thing about before David wanted to put the tabernacle permanently in Jerusalem, and his son eventually built the temple, and you might say put the tent pegs in concrete, God's desire was for the tabernacle, his presence, to move around among all the tribes so no one can claim him as their own, which is really interesting. So sometimes the tabernacle would, came to Shechem, but sometimes it would go up north, and then sometimes it would go south, and all over the land. And by the way, when David said, I want to bring the tabernacle to my city, I want God to live with me. It didn't go well, did it? You know the story? Yeah, when they're moving the tent, a guy dies for doing the right thing. So, yeah, that's a whole other strange story. But so John is, I think, purposely using tabernacle language to speak of the presence of God, so that God is on the move again among his people. And you'll see it. Just like the tabernacle of God of old, Jesus, the tabernacle of God in John's narrative world, moves from Jerusalem to the north, moves to the south, the east, and the west. God is on the move. As a matter of fact, this tabernacle will even return close to Shechem, its original place when it first came into the land. And this tabernacle of God, will have a conversation with the Samaritan, and she will say, you know what? We know that you Jews say you worship God in Jerusalem. We Samaritans say we worship God at Shechem, Gerizim. And Jesus says, God is on the move. It's no longer that place or this place. It's the tabernacle of God has come here. God has come to this mountain at this time. So you see what John's doing early on by claiming when the Word became flesh. Isn't it curious? He mixes the metaphor. A word became a fleshly thing, not a spoken word. And then he speaks of this presence, this Word becoming flesh, as a tabernacle on the move. And of course, you can't help but talk about the tabernacle or the temple without talking about the glory of God. The glory, the Shekinah, the legendary Shekinah glory of God, that when God would show up, the word in Hebrew is kavod. And kavod literally means heavy or weighty. We would say gravitas. Have you ever been in the presence of someone, and you may not know them, but they just carry gravitas? You just know you're in the presence of someone who matters. You know what I'm talking about? Do you ever have that experience? That's the Hebrew word kavod. When God shows up, it matters. It's heaviness. It's a glory. And the way John says it is, this tabernacle moves about. It's the glory of the only begotten from the Father, who is full of grace and truth. And he'll distinguish between grace and truth when it comes to the law and Moses, at least as he compares it. So once again, John shows up, verse 15, just like in the gospel. Here comes John again, and what does he do? He bears witness to this glory that is evident through the one and only begotten Son of God, and says, this is the one I'm talking about. He comes after me, but he has a higher rank because he existed before me. So even though in the temporal order of things, the baptizer shows up first, witnessing the light, and then the light shows up, John will claim Jesus is more important because he has temporal superiority. That is, he existed before me. And we'll talk about the importance of preexistence for John. I mean, that's exactly where he starts his gospel. In the beginning was the Word. So then, when he speaks of this glory that existed before all things, and now the fullness of this glory, verse 16, has been revealed, and we have received it. This is that book of glory language. Those who are children receive the glory, and this glory is grace upon grace. Well, what grace is he talking about? The first grace is the revelation of God through Moses, the law. But what John shows is how what God did through Moses and the law, and through the tabernacle, and through the Feast of Tabernacles, and all these Jewish themes are important when God shows up and something happens, and the Jews marked it as a significant occasion for a memorial. That's the grace of God. He even comes to Abraham, not because Abraham necessarily earns it. He comes because God is a gracious God. He chooses Israel as a gracious act of election, not because they earned it. So the grace, put it like this, and people in the Hebrew Scriptures were saved by God's grace. But that grace was surpassed by a greater grace. As Paul says in Romans chapter 5, a superabounding grace. Grace upon grace. And what is that? Well, verse 17, how is this grace superior? Well, the law is given through Moses, but grace and truth are realized. They reach their fullness, their completion through Jesus the Messiah. And this is the first time his name is mentioned with the Jewish title, Jesus Christ. The word Christ comes from the Greek word Christos. It means anointed one, just like the word Messiah comes from the Hebrew word Mashiach, that also means anointed one. Grace and truth are realized, revealed, manifested through Jesus Christ. And so why is it superior? Well, verse 18, no man has seen God at any time, including Moses. Remember? Remember Moses wants to see God, and what does God say? Nah, you can't handle it. You'll get my backside on my way out, you know. So no one has seen. As a matter of fact, we'll see this later in the Hebrew Scriptures as well as in John's Gospel. If you see God, you're dead. It's over. So no man has seen God, and yet the only begotten of God, who is the bosom of the Father, the very expression of God, he has, and this word is exegesis. He exegeted God. And that is a word that means he explained him. So this is what I conclude. Jesus is fully man. He's flesh. But he's more than a man. He's the only begotten of God, full of grace and truth. And to put it like this, he's the most God can be crammed into human flesh. You can't know any more about God in human flesh than Jesus Christ. He is the full revelation of God. And yet, he is distinct from God the Father. And you see that clearly in John's Gospel. And that's all I've got to say about that. Well, actually, there's a lot more to say. We got a minute, because I want to try to stop at 5 till, at least according to my phone, it says 1 minute. Anybody have a question about what I talked about?
Right in verse 9, could you speak on the fact that they're saying that he's saying there was the true light, which come into the world, enlightens everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. So some will argue, John, the prologue seems to be claiming that everyone gets it. Because the word enlightenment, we even use it that way. It's used in a way that speaks of mental understanding. As a matter of fact, in Greek, there are 3 different words for seeing. And one is enlightenment. I didn't mention the other one, that we beheld the glory. That word theoreo means to stare and gaze at, like, wow, like a painting, you know. A master, wow, you just try to take in the glory of it. So John's Gospel uses a lot of different words to try to get at this idea of understanding or revelation or seeing. And you might think, oh, well, he thinks everybody gets it. But then he turns right around and goes, no, that's not what I mean. So that's why I emphasize the language of the context of darkness. John says, a light's coming. The light comes into the cave. It lightens everybody. But the question is, they may see it. This is important for John. You may see the miracle, but do you see the sign? You see what happens, but do you understand what it meant? Because these miracles are signs that point to who Jesus is. That's why it's amazing that a miracle can happen and his enemies never deny the miracle. They don't say, oh, that didn't happen. No, they know it happened. They have to attribute it to something else. But you can see a miracle, but the question is, do you see the meaning of it? Do you see the sign? You might say, one scholar said this, the signs are like signposts. You're not in Jonesboro when you're coming down. We do Highway 63, but a sign points Jonesboro. And you'll know you're there when you're there. So those signs are like pointing. This is where you find him. And if you mentally see enlightened, which happens only by God, the enlightenment that happens, can't do it by the will of man, not by the will of flesh, happens by God, by the Spirit, we'll find out, Jesus will say. Then you understand what you saw. Does that help? And we're out of time. Good night, everyone. See you. We'll look at the calling of we'll look at John the Baptizer's ministry and also the calling of Jesus' first disciples in chapter 1.